One being Andrea Brubaker. She is the Vice President of Business Development with American Pest. And then we also have Wayne White, who is the Vice President of Technical Services. So Wayne and Andrea, if you all would like to come on to say a quick hello, and then we can go ahead and go get the webinar started.
Well, thank you so much for having us, and thank you to PMA for sharing great information always to members, and especially now, enabling us to stay informed on important topics. And Wayne and I appreciate the opportunity to share our knowledge about disinfection services today. And we hope that today's webinar will provide additional information to help you make the best decisions regarding your disinfectant needs. Wayne?
I couldn't say it any better than that, Andrea, other than to add my thanks for giving us the opportunity to talk about something that is really a very crucial thing in a very wild world that we're living in right now.
It is indeed. So let's get started. We can go ahead and look at this slide here. As you can see on the slide, protecting ourselves and our properties has become front of mind. The onset of COVID-19 has definitely established the need for additional protection in our homes and businesses against potential contamination. You know, we learned pretty early on from the CDC, unfortunately, that one way people can contract COVID-19 is by touching contaminated surfaces or objects, and then touching their mouth, their nose, and even their eyes. And the continued spread of the virus has led to a growing number of environmental health liability concerns. In addition to a general cleaning routine, you know, we're now looking at sanitation, disinfection. You know, what does this mean to us? And how can recurring disinfectant services play an important part of our COVID-19 precautionary plans? As the CDC recommends, you know, you need to have a plan for COVID-19. And it even stresses the fact that you'll have to go back and make changes to that plan, you know, throughout this process. It's a very fluid situation and things are changing all the time. I mean, ultimately, the main thing is that you have to feel like you have a good resource here, whether it's a current provider that you've already talked to about disinfectant, and if not, you know, we're here for you today through PMA to give you some more of that information. I mean, undoubtedly over the past 6 months, you or members of your team have had to assess and adjust, you know, your cleaning protocols to ensure maximum health and safety at your properties. And you may have heard of, you know, UVC lights or swab testing for RNA and other tools to help you in this battle against COVID-19. It can be difficult to decide, you know, what is best for me. One of the most popular choices is the application of disinfectant. And, you know, a lot of us are purchasing disinfectant and applying it on our own, or we're hiring a professional to handle the disinfectant program for us. Hiring a professional takes the burden off of you to have the application equipment, products, PPE, and a professional will also be able to provide verifiable training documentation that their technicians applying the product, you know, have been properly trained to do so. It's really important, should this come up later on, you know, what you were doing to protect your staff, your tenants, your residents. And not everyone feels comfortable working in areas with COVID-19 or the potential for COVID-19. So us as a professional providing that service for you takes the stress off of your staff, reduces anxiety and even fatigue. I know a lot of us are really overworked. So essentially, professionals are a good resource and they can cover large areas quickly, saving you time and money. So, you know, figuring out the best professional to hire and who to partner with can be challenging. And that's some of the stuff that Wayne and I are going to discuss today. So next slide, and over to you, Wayne.
Thank you, Andrea. Very, very nicely done. So we're talking about a disinfectant service, and obviously in the current pandemic in which we all live and operate and try to do the best we can, this comes up more and more as we enter spaces that where we're not sure whether there has been any contamination. There have been spaces that have been hardly occupied for weeks or days or months. And yet now, as we go back into places, it's going to be important that we can provide some assurance to workplace staff that there is not a risk of contracting COVID-19 in the workspace. So this disinfection service that we're talking about, it's using an EPA registered disinfectant applied per the label instructions. That always includes the use of personal protective equipment. So early on in this pandemic, those of us who were interested in trying to provide this service to our customers and to others found it very difficult to come to be able to buy the disinfectant products. The PPE, as we all heard many times over the news, was hard to come by. So you want to make sure, as Andrea alluded to, you want to make sure that the provider that you're partnering with has the ability to have an EPA registered disinfectant and all the proper personal protective equipment that's required by the label. And it's not just to apply the product that the PPE is important, it's also to protect the applicator against exposure to the coronavirus during the disinfection process. We generally want to see a site evaluation done to determine the need for the particular PPE and the safe handling of any contaminated materials. So as an example, a positive COVID case in a healthcare setting would be handled differently than a preventative disinfectant service just in an office building where the staff is finally returning to work. There are protocols for the handling of those contaminated materials that might be present in that positive COVID situation. In terms of the disinfectant products, the EPA has determined the criteria required to be on its list of registered virucides that are effective against the coronavirus. And so we can all have faith that the products that we've chosen and the products that are on that list will be effective against COVID-19. I think I'll pass it on to the next slide. I think that's me again. So a lot of this disinfectant has to do with hard surfaces. Andrea will talk more about touch points and real critical areas. But if the disinfectant products, and there are different ones and there are different chemistries involved, if the disinfectant is applied properly, and the particular one that we use, and many of them, need to be left on surfaces and wet for 10 minutes, then we can have faith that the virus is killed. The opinion about how long the virus will become active on surfaces really varies. I think generally we think that on different surfaces that the virus can survive up to 7 days, and it may be less than that depending on the exact surface. But the real critical thing when you're coming up with a plan to do this is to realize how often is there potential contamination in the workspace, and how often might a disinfection service need to take place to prevent that, to minimize the risk of that. Next slide. So how long does it last? I mean, that's, it would be wonderful if we had a product that we knew we could do a treatment and it would last for a month or for weeks or whatever. As it stands right now, there are no products that I know of, and I have searched the CDC and the EPA's website to determine that there don't seem to be any products that have a verifiable continued efficacy to continue to kill virus after the treatment occurs. The The EPA states that they have not been able to find efficacy of any of the products that they've evaluated that claim long-lasting effects against the viruses. So no EPA registered products with label claims that they're going to be effective over the course of hours to months are really to be believed. That anyone who might be advertising a long-lasting treatment, I don't believe is being particularly truthful. So how long does it last? It is a one-time treatment. It was a one-time disinfection service. And until those surfaces are contaminated again, then they will remain virus-free. We should point out that normal cleaning might remove some viruses from surfaces, but doesn't necessarily mean that the virus is inactive. So it's really important to use one of these EPA approved products from the EPA list and to have the disinfection service performed by a well-trained company who knows exactly what they're doing. And it's me one more time. What do you expect during the service? So there are different methods of application of the same product essentially, but the application in general will leave surfaces damp for a period of time after treatment. There needs to be this generally 10-minute wet time for the virus to be killed. So along with that though, there is a method of treatment that involves an automatic ULV mister. So it disperses the disinfectant in very fine particles that kind of hang in the air and slowly settle onto the surfaces. So that's doing its work after it settles onto the surfaces and wets that surface. So those surfaces need to remain wet. There are lots of touch points and critical areas, doorknobs and other things that we'll talk about, I think, in a later slide, that need to be treated so they can be sprayed. They may not all be affected by an airborne small particle mist that settles. So other methods for application of the disinfectant would include spray tanks. There are different kinds of spray tanks that can be used, just merely spray bottles. Wiping surfaces with saturated cloths with the disinfectant. And again, the key is that it does need to remain wet for that period of time. So given the fact that this is the way it takes place, there will really be no access to the space during application and while the treatment dries. Typically, drying time is 1 hour, maybe post completion of the application, but it certainly depends on the ventilation and particularly on the humidity of the area. We all know about humidity and how it affects the ability to dry. So the lower the humidity, the more ventilation there is, the quicker the material will dry. And then once it's dried, there is no harm in returning to the area. There will be items that might have been contacting the disinfectant that need to be washed off. Food handling utensils and food surfaces and things like that would then need to be washed. But there is, once that material has been allowed to be wet and once it dries, then the virus should be killed.
Excellent. Thank you, Wayne. So an important step prior to professional disinfectant is a consultation. So whether you're looking into precautionary applications or have an urgent issue, identifying your particular needs prior to developing a method of action is just as important as the treatment itself. So having the opportunity to talk to your selected professional will really help you figure this out. We talked about cleaning versus sanitizing and disinfecting. You really want to be clear on what your provider is recommending for your facility's needs. understand what's going on in the facility now. What are the behaviors of the occupants? What adjustments have you made to the facility? Have you closed some common areas? Have you adjusted schedules for staff? So all of that's really important for us to understand when putting together a disinfectant plan. Very important for us to know, and a lot of people don't like to tell us, but it's important for a professional company to understand if you've had a confirmed case of COVID-19 at your property. We need to be able to inform our team so that we are not cross-contaminating. So for example, if we have a particular space that we're concerned that has definite exposure to COVID-19, that would be an area, for example, our staff would work in last so that we're not potentially cross-contaminating an active virus to other parts of the facility. So it's really important during that consultation that you be as transparent as possible with your vendor. Also, what are the structural components and contents in the space to be disinfected? Sometimes we're called in to do disinfectant prior to a leak being repaired or, some other type of structural issue. You could have standing water or a backup issue. So any of those things you need to share with your disinfectant provider as well. Contents, of course, can always be a challenge. If you have an overly cluttered space or a potential hoarding situation, all of those have to be addressed so that we understand how we can disinfect properly. We'll need to review what type of equipment our team needs and really make sure that you understand at your facility what our technicians are going to be looking like, what they're going to be bringing in. As you've seen on some of the slides, our technicians do wear a Tyvek suit and respirator, and that can be off-putting or a concern for people at your property that may see us walking around. They can say, what are they doing? Or, should I be in PPE? So having that conversation up front so that your tenants and occupants understand what's going on in the building is very helpful. We also will need to identify in the consultation how much time we think it's going to take for us to effectively provide the disinfectant service, and how much time, like Wayne was saying, that we'll need for the product to dry, the application. So we know if we want to post a notice and let people know that this area will be closed during this period of time, we want to have a really clear estimate on what that's going to be so you can communicate effectively, for your facility. Every facility will have unique high traffic areas of concern. And that's something that we need to discuss in that consultation. We have to determine the best time to disinfect. Is it going to be early in the morning or late in the evening when there's going to be less foot traffic in a particular area? And don't forget that this consultation is really a time for you to ask your provider some really important questions. What type of training and certification does the company have? You want to ensure that they're mentioning OSHA guidelines and respirator protection training and fit testing, as well as blood-borne pathogen training. All of those are very important for disinfectant applicators on a professional level to have those certifications. As Wayne touched on earlier, you can ask them, what products are you going to use in my facility? You can request a copy of the SDS, and you can even verify for yourself on the EPA website if it is a listed product that's been approved to be effective against the virus. Don't be shy to ask those questions. And the last two questions I would probably ask a provider would be, what is your process for disinfectant? You want to make sure that they at least talk about some of the things that Wayne mentioned today. They need to have a general knowledge of how important it is for contact time. And, surface contact is what actually makes the disinfectant application verifiable and effective. So that's really important. And finally, insurance. You can ask them what coverage they have and ask that you be an additional insured. Send you that information. So just don't forget, this is your time to interview your provider as well. And as Wayne was saying, at American Pest, we stepped up to offer this service as well as many different service providers. So your standard cleaning companies, your janitorial, your specialty restoration, carpet cleaning organizations, a lot have a background in providing safe environments for their customers. And so you'll see a lot of us with that great information, but it's okay to ask those questions and verify that they're delivering the service that you're expecting at your facility.
Andrea,
Next.
let me just add to that, something we alluded to earlier, but not only do you want to make sure that you know what the provider is going to be doing in the way of a disinfection service, but you want to make sure that they understand this and will be protecting their own workers with the
Good point.
proper PPE, with the proper protocols. And I think I alluded to this earlier, that we would handle a situation with a positive COVID case in a room of a healthcare facility a bit differently than we would just a preventative case. So they should be able to talk intelligently about how that service will look different in those different areas.
Yeah, and to your point, Wayne, it's also important to understand if someone is in quarantine and if they may not be able to leave during the application, it's important to coordinate all of those facts when getting disinfectant service. So thank you, good points. Next slide. So as we mentioned, during the consultation period, determinations will have to be made on the appropriate areas of application. Obviously, when you think about or maybe see on TV, you may see people just coming in with foggers and you just imagine that they're covering all surfaces that potentially people may touch. And it's really a little bit more intricate than that. We want to make sure we're taking detailed notes on the type of materials and surfaces that are located in these areas. We haven't had any issues with our product damaging surfaces or so forth, but it's important to understand and be able to communicate that there may be spotting on this piece of wood furniture after the application, so we can be clear to our customers and deliver a message on that. But really, most people in the disinfectant industry should be able to help you identify critical control points, is what we call them. And those are just going to be anything, and it gets crazy. You never think about this until you're actually doing the disinfectant service, all the things that we touch, in a facility. And it starts, with the door. It's not just the doorknob. It might be a doorbell. It might be a door handle. It's the handrails, door frames, all of these areas that we touch just going into a facility, countertops, mailboxes, desks, chairs. Think about trash can lids. Of course, in the photo, we've got the elevator control buttons, restrooms, common seating areas, light switches, your laundry equipment, if you have a shared laundry area, vending machines. I mean, there's just so many places that we touch during the course of a day, and all of those need attention by a professional if that's the area that you're targeting for professional disinfectant. So your provider should definitely come up with a plan and list all of those items for you, and it really helps you brainstorm. Also for your facility, if you've developed a plan where maybe you've closed off some of those seating areas or maybe have discontinued use of vending machines, that's something that you can communicate at that time to your provider. It's really important after your disinfectant service that you have some type of documentation, that it was done, and a detailed report listing the areas that were serviced and how long the application took is going to be really important for you later on. A lot of organizations can provide a certificate, showing that disinfectant has been done, or a sticker or some type of seal to make sure that people entering the facility know that it has been disinfected. And that's a really helpful tool for peace of mind. I think that if you can just ensure that you have an idea or areas of concern, there may be some hidden areas or maybe just staff access, maybe it's some maintenance areas, but all of those should definitely be considered during this process. Next slide.
Andrea, let me add that I think what you said is so true, that until you actually do one, or until you go through and think about all the areas in a facility that are touched, you just don't realize. And a different facility, a restaurant, for instance, where there are chairs. Now, when you go in to sit down at a table, what do you grab? You grab the back, usually the top back of the chair, and pull it out. And then you put your hands on arms of the chair if there are arms of that chair.
Exactly.
It's experiences like that we've had that allow us to really identify more and more of these areas. Interestingly, these days, even eating outside at a restaurant, you wonder, like, well, the salt and pepper shaker, it wasn't on the table, and what did they do with that? So the more you think about the process, the exposure, and the likelihood that coronavirus could be on surfaces, the more you begin to develop the ideas about all of the surfaces that need special attention.
Right. You're absolutely right, Wayne. It was really eye-opening to me when I did my first disinfectant service, how many areas actually had to be touched. So thanks for bringing that up.
Sure thing.
Next slide. So for us, obviously, before and after any type of disinfectant service, it's really important that you've gone through the consultation phase and that you understand the space, you're familiar with the space, you have access, keys, who's going to meet us, who's going to let us in. All of those expectations should be outlined prior to the schedule of the service. Special considerations, as I mentioned earlier, for clutter, all of those issues need to be addressed in advance to the actual service day. And you want to have a contact, during the application. Who do we reach out to if we run into a problem? It's very important that we have that information. And to convey to the occupants of an area that's being disinfected, we want to make sure that we're giving them tips or recommendations. They need to leave the space for this long, or they need to make sure themselves and any pets are out of the area. So whatever specific instructions that the disinfectant provider has for their service, and that's going to be based on the type of product that they're using and their application methods. All of those should be discussed in advance. Like we mentioned here, we offer a quick PDF that we supply, and it lists the things that the customer is going to be expected to do. And that's just to ensure that we have the most successful treatment possible during that time frame. Next slide.
Yeah, so just a little more talk about preparation. And Andrea mentioned that depending on the application equipment, depending on the exact disinfectant used, there are lots of considerations that you need to think about ahead of time. What kinds of materials might be damaged by moisture, for instance, paperwork, artwork. If you're in an art museum, you have some different considerations than if you're, in the break room of an office building. So thinking about those things, removing those things, if workers left in a hurry the last time they occupied a space, and in some cases have not returned to that workspace in months, then some of their personal items are still on their desktops. And so those kinds of things should be taken into consideration when you come up with that plan. In terms of food service, removing any unsealed food items, any medications as an example. We've done some disinfection services in restaurants, and food containers, utensils have to all be considered, the countertops, the food prep areas. Lots of these items that can be placed away if they are clean, then they can be placed away in cupboards or drawers, because the application of the disinfectant, while perfectly safe when following label instructions, may leave a disinfectant residue on a food preparation surface that isn't appropriate for that to be used, or for those food utensils to be used without being first washed. So sometimes the restaurateurs want to put those items away and keep them out of the way of the disinfectant material itself. It kind of sounds like a stretch, but if items are being covered or removed and they had the potential to be contaminated with virus, then those should be sanitized with a safe product. There are a number of different disinfectant wipes, although they are pretty hard to find, even still to these days. To this day, disinfectant wipes are a rare commodity, but there are lots of different types of disinfectant. The alcohol-based materials that are over 70% alcohol are effective. So any of those kinds of things can be used to sanitize and disinfect those items that then are being covered if they are potentially contaminated. It's important that access be allowed for our technicians through the space. Again, if nobody's been there in a while, it could be that there are lots of things out and in the way, and we might need to make a plan, and a site visit would help identify some of those things. And Andrea already mentioned that pets, and if we didn't mention it, certainly humans need to be removed from the premises during treatment. In general, if you had fish tanks, they would need to be covered when we do pesticide treatments in areas. We know that fish are very susceptible to the effects of pesticides, so covering those fish tanks, sealing them up, making some arrangements for those, and any other pets that might be present need to be considered in your plan. So just, considering the items in the space and the effect that this mist or a liquid spray out of a pressurized spray tank would have on them are really important considerations. I think that's what we had to say about that sort of preparation.
Yeah, and I've got one more thing to add to Wayne now. After you've had your first professional disinfectant service, I recommend that you review with your service provider how it went. And that way you have time to discuss what you liked about it, what you didn't like, and what you can improve for next time. Every situation is going to be different, and every application is going to be customized to that particular situation. But we're working, like I said, a very fluid time, and things are changing all the time. Could be new recommendations that your service provider has for the same environment that you had disinfected before. So just really stay conscious of that procedure and what you like about it, what you don't like about it. Having those open discussions with your provider really go a long way in offering a good relationship with them. That's all I got.
Fantastic. Thank you so much, Andrea and Wayne. We are going to segue into our Q&A portion of the webinar, and we already have quite a few questions. So I will just ask the question, and then whoever feels most comfortable to answer the questions as they come, feel free to just jump in and answer. And to our guests, if you have additional questions that have not been submitted, please submit any questions that you have to Andrea or Wayne via the chat. If you don't feel comfortable with sending them via chat, you can also send them to their email address or contact them directly with the information that is displayed on your screen at this moment. So for our first question that we have is from Kathy. Her question is, are wooden surfaces like church pews ever discolored during the service?
So I would take a crack at that and say that when you're concerned about the wooden surface, wiping it after that wet time is usually the way to go, so that you don't leave the wet material on to dry in the hour or whatever it takes. I think we found that the wiping of surfaces with microfiber wipes do a good job of, once the material has had a chance to remain wet there for the 10-minute time frame, they do a good job of wiping up just enough of the material so that there isn't much spotting, particularly on wooden surfaces. But obviously, every wooden surface may react differently to the disinfectant, so it's easy to say, but if wood was a concern, if wood surfaces were a concern, it might be wise to try an area ahead of time and make sure that you're not creating problems there.
Yeah, exactly, Wayne. I think doing a test area, especially, in a church and pews, you want to protect those and keep them safe. So doing a test in a certain area that's not really visible would be our recommendation for sure. But overall, we've been very successful with leaving our furnishings the way we found them, just disinfected.
Okay, we have a couple of questions from Raja. His first question is, how do you know your treatment worked?
Andrea, or I can take that. I mean, the technology for all of this is so relatively new that there aren't tests and swabs and things available at this point that we could go and check. We do know, and I have faith in the EPA's ability to register these products and to test the efficacy results of them. So I have faith that these products, when used properly, will kill viruses. So the real crucial thing is, as we've kind of discussed over and over in this webinar, is getting the material to all of the surfaces that need to be treated. I think that is the key.
Right.
Okay. Next question. Do you have a pre-treatment test kit to detect for harmful viruses and bacteria? I think you kind of answered that.
Yeah, I guess I jumped ahead. Might have seen that question ahead of time.
Yep. No worries. And then there's no, to answer the question, a post-treatment test kit to check if they've been destroyed at this present moment. Raja, that does not exist. So the next question is, in the environment, there are both beneficial and harmful microorganisms. How do you ensure with your treatment that only harmful organisms are destroyed? And I think that may be similar to what you just said.
I mean, I'd say that the surfaces that we're talking about, I don't think that there are really any beneficial organisms on these types of surfaces. Certainly in, outside when we think about flora and fauna and different plants and animals, and some are invasive and some, when it comes to pest control, there are insects in our world that are beneficial, honeybees, for instance, that we want to leave alone. But when it comes to the kinds of surfaces that we're treating, I don't believe that there are any beneficial organisms that should be left on these surfaces, that everything that can be removed in terms of bacteria, a microbe, or a virus, I think most people would want all of those things removed.
Thank you, Wayne. Those were all the pre-submitted questions that we have. To those participants who are on the line, if you all would like to verbally chime in and ask a question, now would be the time. Are there any additional questions that anyone may have at the moment? We have a question. Is the fogging effective with disinfectant or spray?
So go ahead, Andrea.
Well, that's a very good question, and thank you for your question. Essentially, whether or not how the disinfectant is applied is really going to be based on the product itself. So there are very many disinfectant products available to us as consumers. So when we select the disinfectant that we want to use, it's just really important that we review that product label and understand how that specific product is effective as far as application. And I know Wayne can elaborate more on that, but just one disinfectant doesn't have the same effectiveness in different types of application methods. So it's important that you understand exactly what you're using and follow the instructions for that particular product. But Wayne, do you want to add on to that?
Sure. And one of the things about fogging, for instance, is it's these very fine particles. And fogging generally is not designed to wet a surface. So it would be a really heavy fog that would be necessary to land, for instance, on a tabletop and remain wet there for 10 minutes. And that's why we use a variety of application techniques. Sometimes it is with a fogger type equipment. Sometimes it's with compressed air sprayers that we can target and direct that disinfectant to these critical control points better. Sometimes it's just with a little hand bottle sprayer and the right kind of wipes that are saturated with the material that we spray these surfaces, these control points, and wipe them down.
Right. Yeah, that's a good point. So disinfectant can be applied by all types of it can be a mop, a sponge, a cloth. So there's lots of ways to apply disinfectant. I hope that answers your question.
Okay. Are there any other questions? They said thank you, Andrea and Wayne.
That.
That's from VJ.
Very nice. Yep.
I'm
VJ.
pronouncing your name correct, BJ. Anyone else have any questions?
Well, if not, I just have one thing that I wanted to share for those who are implementing their own disinfectant programs and plans, which is very common. Recently, my son took me to the gym where he works. He's a personal trainer. And he was so excited to show me his electrostatic hand applicator and his product that he used to sanitize the gym, in between clients. So I thought that was great. But when I asked him, well, what is the product? How long do you leave it on the surfaces and so forth? He faltered. He didn't have those answers. So if you too have people on your team that are providing this important service, please make sure that you equip good answers to those questions, because you're representing that you have a safe environment for staff and tenants to. You want to make sure that you are able to make them feel secure that the application that you're providing is safe and fabulous, and have all that information on hand. And don't worry, I taught him all the right answers.
It looked like maybe we had a question or two that were coming live. I'm not sure.
Yep, you all answered those two, and it looks like, are there any remaining questions? Because it looks like we've hit all of the questions that have been submitted thus far. Last call. I know you guys wanted to hear something else, but I wasn't gonna say. Okay, well, without further ado, once again, if there are some questions that you all think about after the fact, this webinar will be housed on the PMA website at www.pma-dc.org. If you have specific questions for American Pest, Andrea can be reached at brubaker@americanpest.net, and Wayne can be reached at white@americanpest.net. Their phone numbers are also displayed on the screen. Again, if you did not have a chance to jot this down, this information will be housed on the PMA website. And at this time, I just want to give a quick shout out to all of our sponsors. As I spoke earlier this morning at the beginning of the webinar, American Pest are one of our 5-star value corporate sponsors, and we just want to thank them for not only being corporate sponsors, but also for giving us all this valuable information and keeping us on the cusp of the disinfecting services. I would also like to acknowledge our corporate platinum sponsors, Inner Solutions and Teffer, and our additional 5-star sponsors are Capital Canopy, ESSI, Finley Asphalt and Concrete, Hawkins Electric, Minkoff Company, MHD, which is Multi-Housing Depot, Owl Pest Prevention, Residency Bureau, and TRC Engineering. We thank you all graciously for your time. We thank you for this moment of coming in so that we can be educated and versed on how to get back to work safely or even in our homes. So again, thank you, American Pest, for this awesome information. We appreciate your time, and we look forward to seeing everybody at the next webinar. Thank you.
You're very welcome. Stay safe, everyone.
Yes, thank you for your time.